Hello, everybody from our class. I have a guest here with me today that is going to be talking about this week's studies. We're talking about common worlds and sustainability. So, my special guest that I have here today is my mother. Her name is Karen. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Hi, my name is Karen. I'm visiting my son Dylan in Vancouver this week. I'm from Saskatchewan, and he's asked me to join him today. I don't know how much input I'm going to have with this, but I just think the subject is important, and I'm just happy to be with him and contribute if I can.
Right on. Thanks for that, Mom. So it's really nice to have a special guest here and be able to collaborate on some of these ideas. Her and I have very similar mindsets when it comes to sustainability because we grew up on our farm together, and I thought this was a perfect week to have her join me. So, to get started here, we're going to be talking about two main articles. We're talking about Dr. Derek Gladwin's Ecological and Social Awareness in Place-Based Stories, and we're also going to be diving into Affrica Taylor's Common Worlding Pedagogies, opening up to learning with worlds. So the first one we're going to look at is about these place-based stories. So Dr. Gladwin had presented us with a few different stories that are from Ireland, and they talk about land and geography as play and place as the central motifs. So one of the first ones talks about slow food, which we thought was really important. What was the way that you had phrased slow food?
It seems similar how it was described as the 100-mile diet, where you try to gather all your food products within a 100-mile radius of yourself. So you're not using the transportation, the fossil fuels, obviously, the packaging, the preservatives on the food would be less because it's not being transported as far, so you would need to use those for preservation. So it's something that I've heard of. I've not necessarily heard of it called slow food, but I think it might be similar to the 100-mile diet.
I think it was similar to that. Did you experience that or able to tap into a diet like that at one point?
It's very hard depending on where you live. Being in Saskatchewan, of course, it is colder there, so a lot of things couldn't be grown where you could actually get those things that easy, but there's always those markets that you can go to that are available, and also growing your own food and being able to can it and possibly trading with other people to make a network of being able to do that. And Saskatchewan was possible a bit.
Yeah, so good points there about being able to have that be sustainable as a practice. And I think I really like what you said about trading, because not all the time are you able to have access to things because of the different growing season and whatnot.
And meats and so forth, yeah.
Exactly. So one thing that Dr. Gladwin did bring up was talking about the interconnections and the importance of relationships between the land, what's growing on the land, the farmer, and the consumer of that, and the relationships between them.
Right.
And at another level, we talked about the restaurant owner who has their own obligations to keep their restaurant sustainable with good clientele coming in consistently, and how that can create stresses on relationships between farmers, their land, the consumer, and the restaurant owner.
Correct.
So there's lots of different elements to consider in that type of slow food or 100-mile diet.
Exactly. You would have the opportunity to maybe have a better relationship with the producer and the customer, because you might actually get to know them as part of your network, which if food is coming halfway across the world, that's pretty much impossible.
Well, it's quite impersonal when it's like that, right? So this really localizes it and places importance on all those different areas. And it's nice to see that in a more holistic way.
Right.
So that was a really important one, and you had identified the benefits of it with reducing the carbon footprint and so supporting local farmers and local economies. So moving into another one that Derek Gladwin had brought up was these ideas about ecological disaster stories, so they're the climate change narratives. And I hadn't really thought about films like The Day After Tomorrow, where there's this this critical investigation of nature through this fear or this monstrosity. And that's where I had a bit of a question, because I understand when you watch a film like that, it really does place you at the mercy of nature.
Correct.
And I'm thinking it might be a bit of an opposite intended effect, where you're trying to present to an audience the importance of understanding climate change and how to combat that. And rather than creating and fostering a connection or an appreciation of nature, it's instead of doing that, it's instilling a fear.
I believe that's so. Just from even seeing, there's the beginning of movies like that usually don't show us the destruction that's happened to make us think of how we can change things. All it does is show us the disaster. So it ends up scaring us, and I feel the same way. We're not really learning a whole bunch, but I suppose we don't really expect that in Hollywood movies anyways. But that's definitely something. I think it instills fear more than creates knowledge.
Yeah, I agree. And you're right, it doesn't give you a whole lot of steps that we can take right now that can prevent this. It kind of just goes right into the action, where it's not giving us a good idea of how we can fix these sorts of things. Another film I'm thinking about is Disney's WALL-E. Okay. And how there was the all the trash that had been accumulated on Earth, and it wasn't sustainable anymore. Mm-hmm. And they didn't really give a whole lot of clues of what to do before that. It just kind of jumps right into it, as we said.
Right.
So that was one of the questions that I have for Dr. Gladwin, to see if there are different things and strategies that can be embedded in these stories, either at the end or at the beginning or throughout the narrative, that are going to give people a sense of appreciation and awe and wonder, rather than a total disconnect or scarcity of nature. Yeah, that was a fascinating article to bring all those different stories together and keep it real in a sense, and keep it where these are speculative stories that really aren't that far off. They could certainly happen if industrialized international business corporations keep operating at the rate that they are now. That's why these stories do have those fear element, because it's really not that far off. I think I'm going to move to the next article. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this one?
No, I think we covered what you were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. So next we're going to look at Affrica Taylor's article that she had written with a few colleagues in 2021. So this is the Common Worlding Pedagogies, Opening Up to Learning with Worlds. So this idea of Common Worlding Pedagogies is a collaborative tool. So it's utilizing all these different elements and bringing them together so we can understand how we can grow with the world, and how we can live within this world and work within this world that is not just human-centered, but more than human. So it's taking into consideration climate, weather, land, space. And in this, there's these ideas about the interdependence between them and the importance of creating lifestyle choices that are going to be sustaining these ecological communities, rather than creating a disconnect or creating a sense of superiority or separate ideas between them, because we are, as Affrica Taylor writes about, we are all connected and interdependent. We cannot be separate from them. And when we are separate from them, we get practices, business practices, ecological practices, and just normal living practices that are harming that system, and it's creating a hierarchy rather than an eco view of those relationships. I also really liked the guiding principles that can help guide this work. So this is when these collaborative interactions are generated through a curious and creative way. So usually, and what she had connected to with her two different scenarios, the one in Australia and the one in Canada, is that it's through children's curiosity that a lot of these conversations can take shape, and I really appreciated that part because it really brings it back to the classroom and makes it more tangible for teachers to actually use that outside time and those conversations that are happening when they're outside together. And it's also about finding and thinking of ways that we can learn with the world and not about the world. So it's using our world and the natural things around us to be used as a tool rather than just open up a science textbook and learn of it. We're learning with it.
Right.
And it's concerned about the relationships. So I had mentioned this before, and it's about resisting making divisions between those and making a connection of those relationships more positive. So that's the ecological worldview, and this responds to the global and local ecological challenges. So what I really liked about this common worlding pedagogies, it's right in the name. It's about unifying our planet. So rather than thinking of ecological problems in another part of the world or another continent as separate, common worlding pedagogies unite that. So it's not so separate and different. So if there's let's say a Gulf spill or an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, let's say we're thinking, oh, we're in Alaska. This is so far away. This isn't going to affect us. But this brings unity to worldwide problems as both global and local.
Yes, there's very big disconnect with that, right? If something's happening in another part of the world, I think it's very easy to take a blind eye to that.
Yeah.
Until it affects you. But the thing is, this is eventually and has started to affect all of us. And so that's very important that we all start connecting to this and become a whole in the world about the environment. Definitely.
Exactly, yeah. And creating that unity. So with practices that do follow that kind of guideline, this is supporting ongoing decolonial efforts. So I really like that's tied in there as well. So basically what happened in both the Canadian and the Australian school was that they had brought children out into nature and they were learning with nature, not of nature. So they weren't just sitting in their school reading books about this. They were actually getting out there and using their senses and using their creativity and using their curiosity to make sense of the world around them.
Right, hands-on.
Exactly, hands-on learning, and it was also very local too.
Right.
They didn't have to go very far.
Yeah.
And there's an importance about being a child and learning about your local settings and actually getting out into them so you can have more of an appreciation of them.
Yes.
You can care about them more easily because you've connected with them, you've interacted with them in a social way. So I thought that was really important. And the idea of the multisensory part of it, and you're getting out there and you're smelling it, you're feeling it, you're seeing it, you're climbing on it. I'm speaking of the tree that had fallen down that they were exploring and considering how it had fallen down and what kind of storm it would have been and the effects of it. For example, the different ecosystems that were based on that tree, so all the bugs and the birds and the squirrels and everything that was living around there, and bringing that all together. I think that's a really important lesson for children to learn.
Definitely, land-based learning.
Exactly. And one thing in nature isn't just one separate thing. It's it's a connection between all of those and part of a system. Thank you. When they went back to the Canadian context, I liked what they had done to extend this lesson was putting it on a map. So when they had done that, they were able to take photos during their entire journey and place it on the map. So the map was a bit more complete and a lot more relevant to their learnings and their teachings and their experiences. So when they had the map back in their class, they were able to connect with it on a more consistent basis because it was not just taught in isolation, like one walk out into the forest. It was reinforced through other days at school.
Right. Yes.
And then the amazing things that they had been learning during this time, such as loss and stories of discovery and stories of death and stories of decomposition and stories of care, all out of one walk when they went to the pumpkin patch. You know, it was this discovery because it was a farm that wasn't there anymore, but amazingly enough, the pumpkin patch would regenerate itself every year. So it's this discovery and this, you know, and then in the banana tree that they had found, there's this idea of you know, of some more discovery, and then most interesting that they had 3 really important lessons that we had actually talked in our course a couple weeks back about the idea of death and how it's a really complex understanding, and to teach it is complicated because some parents have different ideas about death that they want to specifically tell to their children in relationship to religion usually and spirituality. So when we are left in a moment where there's either a story or someone comes to school and they said that their dog has died, it's a complicated thing for teachers to open up and teach in a very prudent way that is sensitive. Because
I imagine, for sure.
And everyone has a different experience with it, right? So it's something you kind of got to tiptoe around when you're teaching and do it in a nice way. So what I found amazing with this common worlding pedagogy is it opens up and it allows for conversations like that to happen in a natural way, because they just stumbled upon a dead squirrel, and what are you going to do? You can't really ignore it, right? It's right there, it's right at your feet, and the nature of what they were doing was to observe. So they were able to extend it in a way where they were also learning about decomposition and how that works. But my favorite thing that they had learned and discussed was about the care.
Right.
And what they had done, they had covered up the squirrel with the leaves and gave it, you know, a proper burial, and they had ideas about that already. So I thought that was a really powerful and really prominent learning moment that they got to experience.
Yes.
And it was because of these pedagogies that these teachers were using. So really interesting. And another thing I wanted to say was just the way that this type of work can really allow children to have a deeper appreciation and connection with the world around them, especially their local world around them, is something that doesn't happen all the time, because maybe it's not feasible because they're in a downtown urban center, they can't connect with places that easily. But to make time for it is important.
Definitely.
For sure. I think that's pretty well what I wanted to say about this. These are the notes that I had brought up and that Mom and I had discussed. Is there anything else that really stood out for you?
No, but it was really nice to read some articles again. It's been a while since I've been in university, so I just appreciate that I was able to be part of this as well. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, I really put in a work on our visit here. And I think I'm going to stick with that one question that I do have for Dr. Gladwin. I want to know what his approach is when learning about these place-based stories, and if there is that opposite intended effect of instilling fear rather than a connection, and how that can be combated, and what kind of strategies can be put in place for the average viewer, let's say, to get that intended impact that they're looking for in those types of stories. So thank you again, Mom, for sitting down and making this video with me and talking about some of these things. That was a lot of fun.
Definitely.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
See you later.